Hey, welcome everybody to a very special debate we have planned today with Holy Koolaid, aka Thomas, and Gret Glyer. No, Glyer. I got it right. I finally got it right. Took me about 6 weeks to get that down. Gret Glyer.
You kind of
Um,
got it right.
Gret Glyer.
Yeah, that's good.
So we're going to be discussing today: can objective morality only exist with a higher power? Gret's going to be arguing the case that he believes that if objective morality exists, it can only exist with a higher power. And Thomas is going to be arguing the opposite, that objective morality doesn't require a higher power, I believe. A couple things to get out of the way first. I want to note to people that, first of all, I want to make sure we have correct audio. I'm doing this as a stream rather than a direct link. So make sure that people can hear us. Let me know. Oh, they say that I'm a little low. I can turn that up a little bit. So let me maintain the little audio here if I'm a little low. I can fix that in just a second. 1 second. I'm going to add a little dB gain here. And while I'm doing that, let me say real quick, there's a fundraiser going on for Red's Rhetoric that he wants me to mention. So if you guys are aware of it, it's a fundraiser for the trip for Vincent Jones and peer review. So the link will be put in the video description below, and you can also head over to Red's channel and get that. While I'm fixing my audio and I raise my stuff up, let me go ahead and introduce my guest here. Holy Koolaid has a channel that he runs, and it's about well, you know what? I'm gonna let him describe it. Holy Koolaid, go ahead and take a minute to introduce yourself, and then we'll do your opening statements after Gret introduces himself.
All right, so my name is Thomas Westbrook, and I'm a full-time secular activist promoting human rights and critical thinking and free thought. And I have a channel called Holy Koolaid where I take different topics in science and philosophy, and I dive into them, laser-focused, 5 to 10 minute videos, animated, try to make it fun and funny. So, and that's youtube.com/Holy Koolaid.
And what about you, Gret?
Yeah, so my name is Gret Glyer, and I am the CEO of an app called Donorcy. So the background on me is I spent 3 years living in Malawi, Africa, which is the poorest country on the planet, or at least it ranks near the bottom most of the time. And after that, I came back to this app, which is a way for donors to see where their money goes when they donate. And then I happened to, and I have a YouTube channel where I talk about all of these third world poverty stuff that I really care about. And I'm also a Christian, and I happened to get into a little bit of apologetics a couple weeks ago, and that turned into some response videos being made, and that's kind of what got us here today.
Okay, sounds good. So Thomas, go ahead, and you're going to be starting us off with your 5 minute opening statement.
I think Gret said he wanted to go first.
Oh, Gret wanted us to go first. Okay, Gret, why don't you go ahead and give us your opening statement? You have about 5 minutes. It will be timed. You don't have to use the balance of the time, but take as much of it as you want. And then Thomas will have equal time. Go ahead.
Okay, sounds good. Well, please let me know if I have like about 30 seconds left. But
I will do.
Yeah, I appreciate everyone who's tuned in today and who will tune in. And the position that I'm defending is a very, Thomas and I talked about this beforehand, but it's a very specific position, which is basically that objective morality can only exist with a higher being. And so just to talk about a few of the things I'm not defending the existence of God. I'm not defending the existence of objective morality. I simply want to talk about the singular contention about whether or not objective morality can exist with a higher being. And I think one of the things that we talked about was important to do during this debate was to define what we mean by objective morality. So my definition is that it's objective in the sense that it only 1 equals 2 thinks about it. So it doesn't matter if Thomas thinks 1 + 1 = 3. It doesn't matter if I think 1 + 1 = 4. Something is objective independent of what humans think about it. So my definition of objective morality would be the same. There are certain things that are right or wrong, independent of what humans think about it. And I think that there are, and just to provide some nuance to that, right? It's a complicated thing that will take forever to unpack. But one of the things that's important to realize is that just because things can be right or wrong no matter what doesn't mean that certain things can't be right or wrong given the situation, right? So context and circumstance are important factors when determining the rightness or wrongness of a certain action. And my contention is that the only way for objective morality to exist is with a higher being. So the basic opening statement argument on that is if without a higher being, if we are just hurling through the universe, if there's an ocean of time that has existed before humanity, and eventually we'll run ourselves to extinction, and there will be an ocean of time that exists after humanity. Ultimately, Thomas and I and everyone watching this, we're just a clump of cells. We're a arbitrary random clump of cells, and if I were to murder someone, it would be just one clump of cells sticking a knife into another clump of cells, and there would be nothing particularly significant about that. And we can create frameworks where we can say that doesn't fit within the framework, but ultimately there's nothing objectively wrong with that action in a godless universe. And then the contrary to that is there is the potential for wrongness with that if there is a higher being. So if a higher being exists, that higher being could put in place rules or weave rules into the fabric of the universe where one person sticking a knife into another person can be wrong. So I'll leave it at that and let Thomas provide his opening statement from here on out.
You do have 2 minutes left in your time. Can I ask real quick, can you give us a quick definition of how you're going to be using the word objective here?
Objective in this, so yeah, the definition, I think I said this, but the basic idea is it's true independent of what humans think about it.
Okay. Thomas, go ahead. You have 5 minutes. Begin.
All right. So what I want to do, can I set up a screen share? Let me do...
Yep, I will present you right now.
Hang on.
Well, as soon as you screen share, I'll present you.
Well, I thought it would let me do this. Oh, here we go. Okay.
Okay, you are presented.
Can you guys see it?
Yes.
Okay. So essentially what I have right here is a gradient. And I think everyone would agree that, you know, murder on the far right side is wrong, and that your children is a good idea. There's no society on the face of the earth that has been able to thrive and to be able to exist and not wipe itself out if they're just going around murdering each other and, you know, slaughtering innocent human beings and not, you know, promoting the raising of children. Now, in between range, there's a whole spectrum. You know, morality is not a binary. It's not that, you know, there's just one side that's wrong. You have, you know, a very discontinuous gradient where some people will say that in vitro fertilization is wrong, others won't. Some people say that contraception is wrong, others will say that, you know, the morning after pill is okay, but not, you know, dilation and evacuation and abortion. You have societies that will, you know, the people's positions in them are range like a bell curve. So you have, you know, morality on one side and immorality on the other. And you'll have a distribution in the middle of people who say that, you know, certain things along that gradient are okay and other things are worse than others. You know, it'd be perfectly okay to eat meat. It might not be okay to eat meat. It's certainly probably a bad thing to eat human meat. You know, but where people, you know, where the subjectivity comes in would be, you know, where people lie on this gradient. But, and that shifts. So you might have in Canada, people might be a little bit more okay with abortion at a later term. And, you know, they're along that bell curve. But there's not a single society, there's not a single culture where the underlying premise, the edges of this are flipped. Like loving, you know, lovingly raising your children being a good thing and murder being bad. Suddenly murder is a good thing and love is a bad thing. So I think where I want to draw this distinction between subjectivity and objectivity is in a perfect world where you have a perfect, or in where you have perfect knowledge. So, you know, you understand everything about what leads to more well-being and greater well-being and less suffering, and in the greatest number of cases, that you can find situations and you can scientifically test and come to, you know, an objective position on whether or not certain things are right or wrong, or where it falls on this gradient itself, where we're trying to push towards, you know, something that's positive and moral versus something that's immoral, tends to be like that in itself. You can have objective standards for them. Now, there's different ways to let me see if, how do you just cancel?
Do you need me to cancel your presentation?
I was going to turn my webcam back on. But anyways, so what, I don't, oh, anyways, now there's different frameworks. There are different frameworks that you can have where, for example, like Kant's categorical imperatives, where he says that what is moral and what is immoral comes outside of us, outside of God. It's, you take certain principles and you say, is it, something that can be universalizable? If you can universally apply, if I think, oh, it's okay to steal something from someone, well, that's not something that you can apply universally, or else everyone is stealing from everyone else, and someone steals it from me and someone steals it from them, and you can't make it universal. And so it shouldn't be a categorical imperative to steal. You can also look at humans as, whether they're an end to a means, or whether they're the means itself, and are you just using the person, or are you treating them like and with humanity.
Thomas, you're getting close to your 5 minutes here. You're open.
Okay. Now, personally, I tend to be more of a rule utilitarian, where I'm looking for actions that maximize well-being and try to eliminate suffering as much as possible. And I think that there's ways to measure that, and that's an objective standard. If you say that all of our moral framework comes from God, you haven't set up an objective moral framework. You've just outsourced your objectivity. You've outsourced the subjectivity. So suddenly coming up with a moral framework.
Okay, and you are agreeing with his definition of objectivity, or objective, so we're all on the same page, correct?
As far as actions being right or wrong, regardless of
what someone
of what we believe.
Yeah, mind independent. Yeah. Right. Okay, so well, if you have a different definition, I want to clarify this to begin with, because objective and subjective is often very confused with people, and people do use these things different ways of how you can be an objective.
The distinction that I would like to make would be that there are objective frameworks, but we subjectively choose which frameworks are the ones that we should follow. So that's why you don't have a universal sense of, some people are more Kantian with categorical imperatives. Some people pursue divine command theory. Some people pursue utilitarianism. Those are all objective frameworks, but we subjectively choose which ones we think are right and wrong. But they are objective frameworks. You can have.
Gret, I want to make sure you guys are on the same page here.
Yeah, I don't agree with that we're using objective morality the same way.
I'm seeing the issue there too. It doesn't sound like to me you're using the phrase objective morality the same way either, and that's why before we started, I want to make sure that both of you are using it the same way. I think, Gret, you're using it one way, and Thomas may be using it another.
Yeah. So Thomas, you brought up this special pleading thing, and I'd like to table that and bring it. I'd like to discuss it, but probably talk about it later. If we could first nail down where we both land on what objective means.
So would you say that something is objective simply because God says, like something is moral simply because God says that that's what you're supposed to do?
Not simply, no.
Okay. Are you saying, this kind of gets into the...
So this is what I am saying.
This kind of gets into the Euthyphro dilemma.
The Euthyphro dilemma? Okay, so objectivity exists. The only way an objective moral framework can exist to make it possible, right? I'm not saying that the Christian God is consistent. We're not talking about the Bible or any of these things. All I want to talk about is this idea about whether or not objective morality can exist and what type of universe it is capable of existing in. And my only contention is that in the atheistic universe, we can have objective moral frameworks. I'm in agreement. But what I'm not, but I think perhaps maybe you're even in agreement that those objective moral frameworks are still subjective. For example, you listed eating human flesh as a bad thing, right? That it's bad for humans to eat other human flesh. From a human's perspective, right? If we were to say what's good or bad for an ant, it would be maybe a set of rules that would define their well-being. So yeah, I'm not sure we're in agreement on the definitions.
But I mean, you can look at it scientifically. So you can say if you define morality as, because obviously something that's good for humans might not necessarily be good for chickens or cows or other animals, right? So we're talking strictly about human morality. We're not talking about anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
but are we talking about human morality or human well-being? That there might be a distinction between those two.
Okay, well, and where I'm trying to lay out a framework is, I would say that when an atheist, or when I define morality, I look at well-being, and I see that as an objective framework that I can look to, and I can say, how can we have the most well-being without and the least amount of suffering? And I think that you can have that as an objective framework, that is your source of
I
morality
agree
to go off of.
with the idea of the framework, but what I'm saying is you still have to go one step beyond that and say, well, what's making that framework superior to any other framework?
And because it makes it an objective framework.
Because it maximizes the interests of those within the framework.
No, yeah, I understand, but why is the humanist framework, or whatever you want to call it, the well-being framework, why is that a better framework than the non-well-being framework?
Well, I mean, specifically because it's in our best interest, and
best interest is also, like, to me, an arbitrary subjective term that you're throwing out.
Well, I don't necessarily see that. Yeah, we do subjectively choose our framework. We can choose objective frameworks, but the fact that we're choosing them subjectively doesn't make it worse. We can use guidelines. We can say, okay, what is our goal here? We want to make our population as, successful, our species as successful as possible. We want to survive extinction. We want life to go on. And you can look at all those goals and say, in order to pursue these goals, here's a framework that is objectively the best. And in our best interest, yeah, that's great.
That's a different definition of objective than
the
idea of 1 + 1 = 2.
I don't hang on. I don't know how we can have the debate on this as the topic, because this was a problem that I thought we were going to run into. This, so I wanted to clarify it. Thomas, you're using objectively a different way than Gret is, and he's using it differently than you. Now,
I think
you could accept for arguendo one or the other, and then we can actually talk about the can objective morality only exist with a higher power. But one of you is going to probably have to concede to the other that just for the sake of the argument, we'll pick one definition to go with. But you always point out that that's not the definition you accept.
I mean, I guess if you're arguing that you can only have an objective moral framework with God, like you're saying, how is that objective? How is that not the subjectivity of God choosing that framework?
So, I mean, I think that's an important question, and I'd be happy to get to the whole special pleading argument, Euthyphro dilemma, but it seems hard to have that discussion until we're both using the same definition of objective, right?
So I'm willing for the argument, Thomas, to go with maybe objective being mind independent, a morality system that's true regardless of if a mind thinks it's true or not. Just for the argument, or do you disagree with that?
I mean, we could go with an argument saying that morality is completely outside of, outside of humanity, outside of outside of us. I still don't see how you could have, a moral framework like that that's dictated by God, that that isn't subjective, that isn't it doesn't make it objective. It just outsources the subjectivity. I fail to see how, if we bring it down a step and we say, what's the objective moral framework for, maximizing well-being, or what's the best objective framework for, maximizing God's happiness, or so whatever you see as that.
I'm fine with talking about whether or not it's possible to have an objective framework with God. But I guess I would wonder, are you willing to contend that it's impossible to have an objective framework with atheism or secularism or whatever you want to call it?
I mean, technically, no. You could potentially have something that's woven into the cosmos that that says, just like the universal constants of gravity, or the cosmological constant or something.
And you would say that those things are possible without a God.
You could say that, in order for the universe to continue and propagate itself and stuff, that, these steps are better than those steps for, creating life or whatever.
Even the universe's flourishing without some kind of higher being would still be a subject, the flourishing would be just as subjective as non-flourishing of the universe.
I mean, technically everything right now, defining it the way that I'm the way that
1 plus 1 equals 2 is an objective fact, and that's something, and we can understand that we can both use the same word for objective in both logic and in moral reasoning, and we can say, okay, yeah, it makes sense to apply objectivity to the rules of logic, but can we also apply it to the rules of morality? And my contention is, in an atheistic universe, no. In a theistic universe, it's possible.
Okay, I mean, on the one hand, I disagree with, I can see what I can see what you're saying, that that it's woven into the cosmos, and on that ground, I guess I would say that yeah, you can have an objective framework where God dictates it, but I don't see how that, I don't see the point. Like, I don't see how that makes it better. I don't see how that makes it, I don't know where you're going with that.
Okay, well, there's lots of places to go with it, but I guess I want to make sure that we're both using the same version of objective. And one of the reasons I brought this up is I made a video talking about this very point, and it was the first quote unquote apologetics video I ever made, and several people took it the wrong way. They took it to mean, they took it to have it be me trying to prove the existence of God or the existence of, and I think one of the implications of this universe is that objective morality is impossible. So we can all get together and we can all agree to adhere to certain objective moral frameworks, and we can all agree to say, let's all do the framework that appears to be in our best interest. But ultimately, that is still a subjective choice that everyone's making. And I think that there are severe implications for that.
Yeah, well, I mean, this kind of gets back to, we were having a chat on Twitter before, and we were talking about, the topic of the debate. And I brought up, kind of 5 things that I wanted to cover. I said, rather than whether or not morality is objective, or whether or not you can have an objective moral framework without God, I would like to go a little bit broader, because to me, it really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's objective or subjective. I want to ask the bigger questions. I want to go further. I want to say, is it better if morality is objective? Is it necessarily, objective at all?
What's true. What's true should be like, what's the most important thing? Like, what's better, subjective or objective doesn't really matter. The best thing is that it's whether or not it's true. So if an objective,
you're trying to argue, though, to get back on the actual topic of the hangout, you're trying to argue, can objective morality only exist with a higher power, correct?
Correct. Yeah, that's exactly my argument.
Now, and Thomas, I thought, would be arguing that morality can exist without a higher power. Like, that's my stance personally, right? I think objective morality can exist with a high power, but I'm not going to argue that. But I thought Thomas was going to argue that position. Is that not a position you want to argue for, Thomas?
Well, I mean, I don't agree with the definition. He's saying that morality is somehow written into the universe. And I'm like, okay, but how? How is that? How did God write morality into everything? Did he write it from a framework of, this maximizes life, this maximizes well-being, this maximizes God's happiness? If there's a particular framework, go a step above God and be like, okay, well, where is that morality coming from? Is that just something that maximizes the best interest of everyone? That's an objective framework, but it doesn't need God to dictate, God to write it into the fabric of the cosmos. So, we were trying to define, objectivity and morality. Because if you're looking at morality as something that comes from God, and I'm looking at morality as maximizing well-being, then in your framework, yeah, you're right. If morality comes from God and that's your presupposition, then I can't argue with you there. In that framework,
well, I'm just using objectivity the same way you would use it for the rules of logic. I'm saying the debate was always about objective morality, and I'm saying the objective rules of logic and the objective morality. I'm using the same definition for both of those things, and this isn't a surprise.
Yeah, again, it depends on how you define, morality, and the fact that so many people disagree on what's right and wrong. For me, I don't think that everything that we follow as far as morality goes, I don't think that those are I think that it is subjective, and I've traveled enough to see cultures that follow morality in completely different ways. And I'd be happy to have. I know that's not the topic of this argument. I'd be happy. I would love to discuss whether morality is objective or subjective. But until we can define what makes something moral or immoral, does it come from God? Is that what makes it moral or immoral, or is it about well-being? Because if it's about well-being, yeah, there are objective standards that maximize well-being and that don't. And you know, you don't have to really, you know, it's like math. You can look at, you know, oh, okay, what causes?
I think the morality does come from God. I think everything comes from God. That would be my position. But that's not necessarily the debate that we agreed to have tonight. I'm happy to have that debate, but I would say that
debate.
What's that?
What?
It definitely is a different debate, Gret, though.
You're exactly. Well, and I wasn't the one who brought it up.
Yeah.
It was Thomas.
I'm
just saying I'd be happy we can talk about that, but the debate that we agreed to have tonight was about objective morality.
Let me ask Thomas this, because if we want to change the debate topic, I'm absolutely fine with that. And if you want to discuss the 4 or 5 things you guys both talked on Twitter, I'm okay with that as well. But to the topic itself, can objective morality only exist with a higher power? I kind of want Thomas to weigh in on that. Do you think that objective morality can exist without a higher power at all?
Yeah, I do think so.
Okay.
But I think that what I call moral and what Gret calls moral are 2 completely different things.
So wait, are you disagreeing with my definition of objective or my definition of moral?
Of moral.
How?
So
because I don't think that's true. I said morality comes from God, but I didn't say morality. God is within the definition of morality. Those are 2 different things, right? There's a maker of morality, but then there's also morality itself. So I'm not sure that we disagree on the definition.
Well, what I'm saying is if we both define morality as something that, you know, is the elimination of suffering or minimization of suffering and maximization of well-being.
I can't agree to that definition of morality. And morality is hard to define, right? It's the goodness or badness. My definition is it's the goodness or badness of certain actions or inactions. And then once you insert things like well-being, then it becomes your subjective take on what morality is.
Okay, and I mean it's going to be difficult to have you know, a debate when our definition of morality itself is completely subjective.
Yeah. I agree. I think both of you are on pages for both objectivity or objective and for morality.
Because if we could agree, if we could agree on what morality was, like let's say that we both agreed that morality was maximizing well-being and eliminating suffering, then I could argue, or getting rid of suffering and
human suffering, I assume is what you're.
I mean, you could even look at like Peter Singer's work on, you know, the expand, take it out to animals and all life, wherever you want to take that. You can look at both of those frameworks, and if we agree on what morality is, then I could say, you know, I could argue with you, you know, like you can say, well, that comes from God. God determines, you know, what maximizes well-being, and I could say, no, like we really can go a step above God and just look at, are people suffering? Are they experiencing pain? Are they, you know, you can look at the pain signals that, you know, are going off when they touch a hot stove or when they get shot or killed. We can look at, you know, happiness.
So I agree. So if we're using the definition of morality, that it's your definition where it's minimizing suffering and maximizing well-being, I don't agree with that but I certainly agree that we can look at we can objectively look at that. From using that definition, we can objectively look at it and say, you know what, I think that fits. This looks more moral than that. I agree with that. We're already in agreement on it.
You guys both come from very different worldviews. Morality is not going to be defined the same way between you two, from a Christian perspective and from a non-Christian perspective. I think that the case should be made. What would be how you define objective? Because that's really what the crux of the matter is. You could go on to the nuances of what morality is, but if either one of you can't come with a meeting of the minds of what you mean by objective, then we will have to change the debate topic to something else, or to discuss the things that you had mentioned in Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, I think the stuff I mentioned in Twitter was, you know, like, is morality subjective or objective? Does it matter? Is it better if it's objective? And you know, I'd be happy to discuss those things, because I think you kind of have to have that groundwork in order to be able to talk about this. But you know, if we can't agree, you know, I'll give Gret his premise that if morality is, you know, something that is dictated by God and it makes God happy, and the moral
Well,
thing is always to
you're
pursue
still
God.
not using my definition. You're inserting God yourself when I don't think I've done that. I do think he's necessary for it, but I don't think I've inserted into the definition.
Fair enough, but like if that is what, and I'm not saying that's what you're saying, but if morality is pleasing God and it's not my definition of morality, I'll give you, I'll yield and say, you know what, like that version of morality you can't have without God, because God is at the very basis of that. But I don't think that is moral. In fact, I think that there's extreme cases of suffering that have resulted from people who are seeking the will of God and who are enacting the will of God.
How can that be if God does? Are you saying religious people who are under the impression that they're acting the will of God?
Well, in every major religious tradition that I've ever studied, whether it's the Bible or the Torah or the Quran, there's you don't have to read very far before God says something like, slaughter the Amalekites, men, women, and children, but save the virgin women for yourself.
Right.
I look at that and I'm appalled.
Yeah.
And
I see that you're appalled, but it's and we can talk about some of those things, I suppose, but the consistency of the Bible, the existence of God, the existence of objective morality. Again, I said before the debate, I'm not necessarily prepared to talk about those things. The only contention I made was this claim that objective morality can only exist with a higher being. And I'm using the words objective and morality. I'm using the definitions that you would find in Oxford, in an Oxford dictionary and Merriam-Webster dictionary. I don't think I'm going out on a limb by using these definitions in like a sneaky way. I'd be happy to have anyone in the comments Google define morality and
no,
see if
I'm personally fine with your definitions, but I'm not the one engaging. But as a moderator, if you want to make an argument for that Thomas can address, but not necessarily accept your terms, that's completely up to him.
I'm not sure I understood.
I mean, like I said, if that's his definition of morality, then I agree with him. I don't have any point of contention, but I don't think that is morality. I don't think that that's moral, and I don't think that that's a good moral framework. So
you're using the definition of well-being, right? That to you, it's from you think well-being is the tangible, like in the moment, is what informs our definition of morality.
Yeah. So for example, I'll give you a couple ways where we can determine right from wrong based off of well-being. So are you familiar with John Rawls, the philosopher?
I'm not.
Theory of Justice.
The Veil of Ignorance.
It's the same John Rawls who wrote the Theory of Justice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know his daughter very well, actually.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. She won't come on. I've tried to get her on. Go ahead. Sorry.
So essentially, the Veil of Ignorance says, let's say that I am in a position where, I step outside of, the world just as a thought experiment. And I'm like, okay, I'm about to be born. Either, an African American in, the 1820s or a white person. Now, I get to decide, should slavery be legal or not? And there's a 50-50 chance. I have no clue. I'm standing behind a veil of ignorance. I don't know whether I'm going to be born as a black person or a white person in that era. Would I make slavery legal? And chances are, I don't want to risk that. I don't want to live in a world where I'm a black person as a slave in, 1820s in America. And so, I wouldn't want it done to myself, so I'm not going to do it to someone else. That right there, you look at the golden rule, and that's almost universal throughout human cultures. There's versions of it, that Confucius came up with. There's versions of it that long predate the Bible. That in ancient India, there's versions of it. In ancient Babylonian texts. And so we see these frameworks arise that try to maximize well-being. We see rule utilitarianism arise. And we're like, these frameworks are objective to try to make the best society, the best community, the best world for human flourishing. And there's ways that we can push towards that. And that's an objective framework. But that framework, and and you're choosing God as your moral framework, and I'm choosing rule utilitarianism. Those are both objective frameworks, but we're disagreeing on what morality is because our frameworks determine what we see as right and wrong.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I the definition that you could just find in pretty much any dictionary, and you're using the definition of well-being, like what's in the best interest of humanity. And if we're
But you're saying you're using the definition for objectivity or for morality?
for morality, for both, I think both of them would be.
What would be your dictionary definition of morality?
The goodness or badness of a action or inaction.
Determined by what?
Well, I mean, that's the thing. That's a good question. That's exactly the point. The reason you're asking that is because, like, who's bad? Is it the collective society, which is just subjective, or is it some higher being, which is objective? Can you objectively say you guys have these rules to live by? I mean, that's exactly.
I mean, I'm using the dictionary definition too, but what I'm determining is goodness and badness are different. You know, it's still a subjective definition. It's very, very open-ended.
See, I think the disconnect we're having is that Gret, you're arguing right now. It seems you're arguing for an objective morality system, and Thomas is arguing for a subjective morality system. Well, that was not the point of the debate, though. That's a completely different debate that you can have. But I need people to be aware that is a completely different subject. Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay. Thomas, would you agree on that as well? That which is a preferred way to look at things through a subjective framework or an objective is not the same as the topic, which is objective morality, can only exist with a higher power. They are different topics altogether.
In the same way that the rules of logic can exist, the rules of morality can only exist. I'm saying with a higher being.
Do you guys want to change it and have that more of that discussion of which one is a better way to go? A subjective framework that Thomas is advocating for, or an objective framework that you're advocating for, Gret? Do you guys want to?
I'd be happy to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to shift gears. I don't think that that there are objectively built into the cosmos. I think that there's a great deal of evidence to the contrary, that they're man-made and that they're created by ignorant, often barbaric ancient tribes. But if I were to yield the premise that a God exists, which I, but were I to say that morality is something that God dictates or something, then like I said, if that's what's moral, then Gret's right. But I don't think that is. And I think the fact that it's so subjective means that we need to talk about whether or not morality is objective or subjective.
Well, so this is why objective morality is important, I think, because if something is right or wrong, independent of what Thomas thinks about it, it doesn't matter what you think about it. You can think something is egregious. You can think something is sick and sadistic and the worst thing you've ever heard in your entire life. You can think it's wrong to ask someone to kill their own son, but you're doing objective framework, and so sure, you can think those things, but standing on shaky ground. Like I'm also, and I'll just concede something right now. I'm very uncomfortable with a lot of, like, I'm a Christian. I'm very uncomfortable with a lot of the stuff that I see in the Old Testament. I'm very uncomfortable with the way that a lot of those things. I really am. I think some of it, I'm very uncomfortable with the concept of hell. I do not understand that. It's really hard for me to grasp. But that said, my definition of morality, of objective morality, it doesn't really matter what Gret Glyer thinks. I'm just some guy. If wrongness was defined by me or by a definition that I subscribe to it, I don't see the objectivity to that.
Well, and I mean that's where I'm saying, like, we subjectively choose our frameworks,
right?
And
but
we subjectively choose frameworks, or we can choose.
I agree that that's possible. I totally agree that that's possible. That to choose an objective framework. So you're like, if you were to choose that the wellness of human beings is your objective framework that you have chosen, still there's no way in a universe without a God, there is no way for you to say that your objective framework that you've chosen to live by is better than the framework of non-well-being, or the framework where you should give.
And by that same means, you can't prove that it is.
Can you explain that?
Like, you're saying I can't prove that my framework is better. I'm choosing it subjectively. You can't prove that yours is any better. You know, let's do a thought experiment. Let's assume that morality is completely flipped. Okay, so just right now, starting today, you know, it's just the purge, and everyone's just going to go out and slaughter each other, and that's a good thing. That's, you know, it's great to murder, and that's woven into the cosmos. It's a parallel universe where, you know, for them, morality is woven into the cosmos, and it's completely different, and everyone is striving to murder, rape, pillage, plunder, you know, torture, you name it. You know, for them, all of those things are great because they're woven into the cosmos. But
Right.
Can you really say that just because it's objective, that would be a great society to live in? Where you're constantly
well,
fearing
that's the thing.
lives
You actually
and
can
stressed out
logically. Here's the thing. Logically, that, like, it doesn't feel good to say it. I get why you're uncomfortable with the idea of that, but you actually logically can say if it's good to murder other people is woven into the fabric somehow. Yeah, logically it's good to murder people. That's been woven into the fabric. That's logically consistent. I don't think that that's the case.
No, but
Yeah,
it's still.
I'm saying it's still logically consistent, even though it makes you feel bad. It's logically consistent.
No, it's not about feelings. It's about that type of society would not survive. They would not thrive. They would wipe each. You know,
and in that universe, that would be a good thing for whatever reason.
You know, and you see that
it makes you uncomfortable, but that's logically true.
You see that arising throughout evolution. You have all kinds of different variations within the animal kingdom and throughout different human cultures where, you know, in some situations there were cultures that, you know, thought that child sacrifice and infanticide was a great thing and that it was pleasing the gods and that was, you know, their objective moral duty. And I think those of us who are a little bit more morally mature or having evolved, so to speak, can look at that and say, you know what, a society where you're wiping out and slaughtering babies isn't necessarily the greatest thing for well-being and for the you know, happiness and continuation of that culture and that society. And so I do think that it's a much better moral framework to look at well-being and thriving, and as opposed to just, you know, something that we feel, you know, we have some type of feeling inside of us of, you know, I feel like God is telling me to do this, because there's a lot of people that have horrible, horrible things that they hear a voice in their head tell them to do, and they go out and do.
Right, but we're just talking about the logic of objective and subjective morality. Like once you introduce feelings into it, I'm not sure how that's helpful.
Well, I'm saying if you know, how do you tune into this objectivity? Is it
that's a tough question.
Into your head? Is it?
Yeah, no, that's a tough question. I'm not sure I have the answer for it. But the question is the question of its existence is not one, like I don't have the tools to defend the existence of objective morality. But the question is, does objective morality exist? If it exists, my contention is there's a higher. If it doesn't exist, then the way that we interact with other people, it might be illegal. It might be not in the best interest of other humans, but it's not bad by any definition of morality that humanity has ever used.
Okay, so does gravity exist?
Yeah.
And that's an objective statement, right? That's you have the gravitation
constant. Objectivity exists.
If we were to, I don't know how decent your physics is, but let's say that our universe was shaped differently and the gravitational constant was different.
Mm-hmm.
That universe, however it came about, whether it's a multiverse and they're colliding and creating new universes, and different ones have different gravitational constants that are all woven into them, or whether it's one God that top down speaks it into existence and says this one's going to have this gravitational constant, both of those scenarios provide for a universe where gravity is constant.
Well, so I have
right?
yes
or no?
Yeah, well, I think it's important. I'd like to make a distinction here. Where you're using the word universe, which essentially means everything, and now you're coming up.
I'm in the sense of our universe as opposed to a multiverse. So I think what you're thinking of is cosmos, which is everything that is, ever was, existed, ever will exist, and that includes the multiverse, which can have different universes with different constants inside them, like different cosmological, different gravitational constants, etc. So
in your multiverse theory, there can be different gravitational rules per
universe,
right? Yeah,
per universe.
I'm failing to see how.
So
operate within this. Like if we were to go to a different universe with a different set of rules, I suppose it would be possible that those rules would be different.
Okay, so
it's possible. Again, that's still, that would be those are like when people are in two different universes, it becomes tricky to talk about because you're not talking about everything all of a sudden.
Mm-hmm. I mean, what I'm saying is, just like you were comparing morality to the constants of the universe.
Right. So perhaps the constants of the universe in one universe and another universe, if they're different, then perhaps those constants aren't actually objective.
Because we can test this. We say that, oh man, like gravity it's completely constant. It's kind of objectively woven into the universe. It doesn't change. It's like math in a way, right?
Mm-hmm. For that specific universe, yeah.
For that specific universe. But we can look at this mathematically and we can say, okay, what if the universe was shaped differently? What if it was, had a different composition altogether?
Mm-hmm.
In that universe, the gravitational constant would be different.
Mm-hmm.
And so hypothetically, if morality was objective in our universe.
But okay, the constant would be different, but perhaps the rules wouldn't be different.
Well, what I'm saying is, like, if morality was objective in our universe, it could potentially be a completely different objective framework in another universe.
Yeah, so I actually think I have a way to refute this that I don't think is I think is pretty sound. So you're talking about the constant of something, right? Like the speed of gravity is like 9.8 meters per second squared or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's possible for the constant to change, sure, but the rules can change. So so what I mean is you can have a universe where 1 + 1 = 2, but what you can't have a universe where 1 + 1 = 3.
Okay. And
so
you're saying.
So objectivity. What I'm saying is objectivity exists, and perhaps in your multiverse theory, I can see how the rules would operate differently, but that doesn't mean that objectivity still doesn't exist.
To try to get this back on track a little bit, because you guys are running out of time. I know you have to go at 5. Gret, your basic position, so we kind of have an understanding here, because I think you guys are worlds apart. I think you guys have a huge disconnect on how you're using these terms. The way I'm trying to understand you, Gret, you're trying to differentiate things like a necessarily true position that is true in all possible worlds, correct?
Yeah, objective, yeah.
Objective, that's true in all possible. Okay, so an analytical proposition like 2 + 2 is a necessarily true proposition that exists in any universe that Thomas is talking about, correct?
Yeah.
Any possible world, even. Which is a little bit different, obviously, than the multiverse he's talking about.
Yeah, the multiverse thing I haven't thought much about. I think that's an interesting way to...
So if you have, let's say that you have aliens on a different planet,
mm-hmm.
would this morality apply the same to them as it does to us?
Yeah, I would say yes. If just by the logic of what objective morality is, I would say yes, it would apply the same.
Okay. What if they propagate their species by, like, if maybe for them rape is amazing, and I bear with me, all those of you who are triggered right now. I understand. But let's say that their brains are wired completely differently, and it's not seen as a shameful thing, and it's seen as like, oh my God, I sure hope that this person will come along, and that it triggers some reward system in the brain, and it only makes people feel good, and there's no cost of raising children, and like it's just completely evolved differently. And for them, it's put on this pedestal of, it's just a completely different situation. They're a different species as far as we are from an amoeba or anything else. Maybe they're not even carbon-based, although they most likely are. In their situation, rape is amazing. But
yeah, I mean, you're making a really strong case for why subjective morality is the only possibility in a godless universe.
Well, no, what I'm saying is if morality is, woven into the cosmos, then, well, I mean, first of all, I don't, yeah, we are kind of getting back to, the fact that we disagree on the fact that we subjectively choose our frameworks. But if you have a framework like rule utilitarianism, then you could potentially say that this universe created a system of or a framework of things that action to maximize life, well-being, and eliminate suffering. And within that framework that's as fundamental as math, like molecules in this situation to form into more and more complex molecules and eventually evolve into life and eventually propagate their genes and everything else. And within this framework, yeah, these are the steps that you need to take to maximize that. These are the steps that you need to take to have a, a healthy functioning society, and that's completely independent of God, completely independent of anything else, just for life to exist, for life to propagate, for suffering to be minimized, that
but those
framework.
things are all subjectively good or bad. So you're saying that, well, that the propagation of life is a good thing, but your definition of good is propagation of life.
But so is yours. And this we keep coming back to this. We keep coming back to this where
my definition of good is not propagation of life.
No, I'm saying your definition of good is subjective too.
And why is that? I'm not sure when you talked about that.
Because clearly both of us were disagreeing on what makes something moral. And
but I think we can be confused. Just like, okay, for example, a toddler might think 3 + 4 is 5, right? He might think that. And another toddler might think 3 + 4 is 11. And both of them are wrong. And it doesn't matter because there's still an objective truth underneath it. So yeah, I think that we can disagree. We can have arguments about what's subjective, what's true and what's not true. But the objectivity is still there no matter what.
Okay, and you don't think that we could all be confused about what's right and wrong, and that?
No, we all can be confused about what's right.
No. Hear me out. You don't think that we could all be confused about what's right and wrong with a framework that God didn't dictate? So maybe there's a framework in the universe that's, this is the best framework for having a good, thriving society. And maybe we're all searching and trying to find it, and we don't understand it.
I agree that if you're using a different definition of morality, of better, of good, because you're saying what's best for the species to survive. And sure, like there can be objectively good or bad. There can be objectively better or worse things for that specific objective framework, but that's still a subjective framework. It's still a subjective choice to pick that specific framework in a godless universe.
Well, I don't see how you can say that. If God is the cause and he makes a universe that has certain moral constants, or if, two universes colliding in a multiverse creates a universe that has certain fundamental constants, whatever that morality is, whether it's, the thriving of life or, well-being or the universalizability of any action, through categorical imperatives, whatever that framework is, if it's wound into the fabric of the cosmos, and we're trying to seek out that to for whatever reason, if it's not to maximize well-being, I don't know what the point of it is. If it's to maximize suffering, well, then I want nothing to do with that objective framework. But whatever it is, I don't see how having God set that in motion versus that comes about naturally, that sets it in motion and comes about with exactly the same result. I find the God part superfluous. And if morality is outside of God and it's completely objective and it's, it's like math and it's completely just fundamental, and you're saying, math 2 + 2 always equals 4, regardless of what I say, regardless of what you say, regardless of what God says, just by definition, 2 + 2 equals 4. Well, if that's the case for morality too, then, God didn't dictate it. God can't change that 2 + 2 equals 4. That's just fundamental. He can't set it in motion. He can't create it. And if it's not outside of God, and God, created objective morality,
well,
then
I'm just getting a little bit lost.
Then it's his subjective framework,
right? You're saying that it's impossible for God to create an objective framework for the universe that he made?
Well, what I'm saying is possible for God to make 2 + 2 = 5. It was just by definition. It's like saying,
God cannot act outside of his own character. That's definitely true.
No, not even outside of his own character, just by definition. Can an immovable object, be broken by an unstoppable force? What happens when
you can't act outside of his own nature.
It's just by definition. By definition,
there are things that God can't do.
It's an impossibility. And so you're saying that morality is like math. It's by definition.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying if it's like math, then God exists. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
But Gret, you're defining math analytically, right? You're saying based upon whatever axioms, 2 + 2 = 4. That's a given. That's a necessary condition in any possible world to exist. But you're saying if that is the condition for objective morality, that if objective morality exists that way, then it has to be from a higher being or God, correct?
Correct.
Because I thought that was the original intent of the hangout and the debate to begin with. But you guys are fundamentally on different worlds, even of how you're using these terms. There's just no connection there. Have you guys been noticing that?
What I'm trying to show is, you're saying that, like math, morality, it's unchangeable, it exists, it's in the fabric of the cosmos, and then therefore God. Okay.
I mean, there's no, that would be I don't think that would be an appropriate way to frame my argument at all. But I would say that if based on a lot more information, if morality exists, God exists. There's a lot more in between A and X or whatever. But I do think that one necessarily leads to the other because objective morality is not possible in an atheist universe.
Is your position that God created an objective framework, Gret?
Yeah, or if it exists, yeah. If given those things exist,
if objective morality does exist, then you believe that God created that objective framework.
Yeah, I think it has to be the case.
Now,
some kind of higher being.
Somebody could show you an objective framework that does exist, that doesn't require God, that would invalidate your claim, correct?
Well, it depends on how you define objective framework. Okay, then no. It would invalidate.
Okay.
The opinion or whatever. Well, okay, hold on. If it's not possible for an objective framework to exist without God, but it is possible for a God to exist and for there to be a subjective framework.
Okay. I mean,
I'm not saying God necessitates an objective framework. Okay. All I'm saying is an objective framework necessitates a higher being.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Did God create math?
Yeah, in my worldview, yes. That's not necessarily what the debate was about, but
does math exist outside of God? So, like, if God didn't exist,
I think
the universe was natural.
Yeah, this is another question. Can objectivity exist outside of God? I think in an atheist universe, the rules of logic, objectivity can certainly exist. But the question is, can the objective morals exist outside of God? And that's what we need. That's the distinction I want to make there. So, of course, objectivity can exist, but can objective morals exist?
Okay, and that's where I feel like we're kind of getting into just this word salad, where, one, I've come about this from the position that objective morality doesn't exist, that we have objective frameworks, but we choose them subjectively. But
I agree with that. I think that's logically consistent, just to out there.
And thank you. But even if there was an objective framework that was woven into the cosmos that we're searching for, that we're trying to discover, we're trying to find something of us don't, that framework, why can't it be that we're searching for it in the same way that we search for, discovering principles in physics or in math, or searching for alien life or something, where it's just a part of the cosmos completely independent of God's existence? We don't need a God in order to learn mathematical principles. We don't need God's existence for there to be math, for us to, examine the constants of the universe.
And I'm saying for morality, you actually do need God. That's been my contention this whole time. I have not made the same contention about math. I think math can exist independent. I think you can be logically consistent and say math can exist in an atheistic universe without God. But the question is, can morality exist in a theistic universe can morality exist in an atheistic universe? That's the question.
But why not?
Why can't we've talked about this ad nauseum.
I mean, why can't it come about naturally? Why can't it, be determined by?
There's nothing to appeal to. When you said it perfectly. When you said good or bad by what standard, I said exactly. There's no standard there's no higher standard to appeal to when we're talking about morality in an atheistic universe. There's no set of rules that would be there. You're a collection of cells, right? You evolved by happenstance, by random chance, and we're glad that you're here, Thomas. But ultimately, you're a random chemistry experiment, and everyone else is the same thing. And how these chemistry experiments interact with one another, objectively, we can create objective frameworks for what could be in the best interest of these chemistry experiments thriving, but we can't say it's objectively good or objectively bad.
See, I'm gonna stop you right there because I feel like I see.
I have to go. I had to go a minute ago. I'm sorry.
Okay, just to real quick, like I see theists do this all the time where they try to minimize an atheist worldview of like everything just down to you're just a bunch of chemicals. And I don't know a single physicist, a single biologist who would look at this emergence of consciousness, this, you know, cognitive singularity of, you know, us coming to be able to realize that we exist and to be able to realize that we're in a universe and to study it. And to,
I'm not saying it's not awe-inspiring. I think humans are incredible beings, but that's you're not going to pin me down on that. I genuinely think humans are amazing, amazing things, and I think that they're a fantastic. I think that when you ask why do you believe in God, I think one of the first things you can point at is you can like just be like, look at me, look at you. Where did this come from?
But I see that, and you know, I'd be happy to talk with you about, you know, abiogenesis and evolution and you know, stellar nuclear genesis and how we got here from nothing. I'd love to talk about that another time. But I you know, I see humans coming into this position where we can know ourselves, we can know the cosmos, we can study it, but we're still evolving. We're not a finished product. So maybe there is something in the universe that we tap into and we figure out is some fundamental constant that dictates right from wrong. Maybe there's some alien race, maybe there's some, you know, highly intelligent alien race that dictated morality and created our universe. Does that make it God? Maybe not, you know, depending on how you define God.
I know
But
Gret has to go. Do you want to take?
Yeah, I'm going to give you.
Do you want to take a minute each to kind of wrap it up? I don't want to. I know you're on a time schedule, Gret, so I don't want to.
I'm going to let Thomas let what he just said be the last word because unfortunately I have to leave right now.
Okay.
But I want to thank you everyone for watching, and I look forward to I'll come back and watch the after conversation later on. So thank you all very much.
We're going to arrange something again with you two. We'll kind of suss it all out. I am having an after hangout. I want to thank. We had triple digits throughout the entire hangout. Watching this, I know there was a huge disconnect. I know there's some problems with the people's terminology not being utilized the same between both participants. I understand that, so it did take a kind of a turn. But we're going to have an after hangout to just kind of to discuss what some of these different terminologies mean, how people can apply them differently. What does it mean to be objective? What does it mean moral? Thomas said he does have time to join us. So hopefully he will. Ocean's going to join us. I think Scott is going to join us. But I do want to thank both these people for coming in today to talk about this. Unfortunately, I said wasn't exactly the topic we discussed, but it was entertaining.
Yeah. Hey, Gret, would you be down to a future discussion on here on like whether or not morality is objective or subjective?
Absolutely. Well, okay, that's a good question. I don't know if that's even possible, but I'm certainly open to have another discussion. And let me think about the particular idea that you just came up with.
Okay.
There you go. That's fair
yeah,
enough.
but
I
really enjoyed this. And Thomas, you were very polite, and I respect you a lot. So I want to thank
for joining.
All right, take care.
All right, thank you guys both. The links to go subscribe to both their channels is in the video description below. Once again, I want to remind people of the fundraiser that Reg Reddix is having to get peer review and Vincent Jones to New York to go have a visit up there, which they better send me lots of pictures of since I'm hawking it for them. But Thomas, I'm going to start a new hangout in about 4 minutes probably. Give the link to only a few people, very specific people, to kind of keep it down to a minimum. And I think they really want to weigh in on the conversation that you guys just had. Is that okay?
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I don't want to like I'd love to talk about, you know, morality and objectivity and etc. I don't really want to you know, just speak for Gret's sake out of respect to him. I don't want to, you know, start tearing apart his position or his delivery or anything like that.
Absolutely, yeah. If he's not there to defend that's absolutely the case. No, I think a lot of people want to talk more about either your performance or some of the disconnect on the terminology being used. Because if two people can't agree on a specific definition, then they're not really arguing the same thing, right?
Yeah. No, I'd love to join and hopefully I learn something.
Okay. And I will be giving that link out to about 4 people here in about 3 minutes. But the rest of you, thank you very much. I will actually put a card in afterwards that'll link to the next hangout, but I'll be doing that later on tonight. So thank you very much. And we'll be